to record. We're sharing the screen. And so here let me kind of bring this down a little bit. Come up here. And so here we go. So we are focusing in on the superiority of Messiah's person and his priesthood. That's going to cover the next 10 chapters. That's the primary focus of these passages. And we're going to be looking at Messiah's superiority to the angels, and what he draws our attention to is he's superior to the angels being these superior beings that God has created, and he's even superior to them because Messiah is God in the flesh. Messiah is divine, and so he's superior to the angels. Now, what the writer is doing, he's basically drawing our attention to that which the Jewish people and which Judaism taught as some of the supreme elements of their faith. And so the supreme elements of Judaism and of Jewish thinking was God's creation of this unique creation, creations, the angels. He's going to speak about the significance of the law of Moses, and he's going to draw attention to the Levitical priesthood, and he's going to draw attention to Moses himself. So these are, if he can demonstrate that Messiah is superior to all of these supreme elements of Jewish thought and Jewish faith. Hold on, someone else coming in. If he's superior to all of those things, then certainly he is worthy of all of our devotion and all of our allegiance, even to the point where these Jewish believers would distinguish themselves from the Jewish community that has rejected Messiah and demonstrated that connection with him by virtue of obedience. Obedience here being leaving Jerusalem when it is surrounded by armies, because the judgment of the city of Jerusalem has been set. And that is what we saw in Matthew chapter 12. The unpardonable sin has been committed, a sin whereby the nation of Israel has nationally rejected Yeshua as Messiah, being led by the Jewish leadership to nationally reject Yeshua as Messiah. As a consequence, Matthew 12, judgment for that is set, and it is impending. This book is written around 66. The first Jewish revolt is going to take place within another couple of years, 67. The temple will be destroyed and Jerusalem destroyed in 70, and then the revolt brought to an end in 73 atop Masada. So let's, whoops, hold on, sorry. So let's, well, where am I? Oh, I'm going backwards. Sorry. I think I'm going backwards. Am I? Whoops. Gee, let me see. Getting lost in my own stuff here. Whoops, someone else coming in too. And again, I don't know why it is with this PowerPoint, but I get a drop down that comes from the top, and because of that, I can't see some of my text up here. No, there's got to be. Why did I? Why did that happen? Okay, hold on. Let me just come down here this way. Because I'm getting kind of confused looking at it this way. Here we go. Sorry. So let me come back up here. Wow, why did it shift to, oh, okay. Okay, here. Wow. Oh, I wonder if some of my slides came out of order here. Huh. What a strange thing. So let me see. Oh man. So let me come back out again. I apologize. I went through this, and I saw at one point when I was going through it, I said, gee, what happened? And um, why is this? Yeah, that's right. So why doesn't it stay there when I'm going here? Okay, so let me be careful what I touch. Okay, so in verse 4, so let me start here. It says that he became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. So this phrase, he became, let me just get my Greek text here. This word he became is that's verse 1. Hold on. Is genomenos. And here it is. Genomenos right here. He became. Notice it comes from the Greek word ginomai, which means to become. And so it's important that we note that the text does not say he became, that he was made superior. See that? Verse 4. So he became, not he was made much superior. Some groups, Jehovah's Witnesses, that would deny the deity of Messiah, they suggest that by virtue of this verse, see, he became much superior to the angels. He wasn't always superior to the angels. But the word ginomai, or in this word, genomenos, doesn't mean he was made superior. It means he became. That doesn't mean he came into existence inferior and then somehow over time became superior. No, he always was superior to the angels with respect to his nature, but but what the writer is saying is that even in his incarnation, he became superior in that he completed his redemptive ministry. In other words, his mission, the angels have a mission, and he's going to talk about this. Their mission is really twofold. There are some angels that are guardian angels that are sent to those who will inherit salvation. So their mission is to see to it that the elect, again, mysterious thing how God makes these determinations, these choices, but their role, their ministry is to make sure that those whom God has elected are ones who come to salvation. That's one of the missions that some of the angels have. Another mission for the angels, for example, Michael the Archangel's mission is to be protective of the nation of Israel. Gabriel had a mission. His mission was to be announcing the coming of the Messiah so as to provide redemption for Israel and the world. Some angels have the responsibility or mission to see that God's creation operates in the manner for which he has created it. Some of the angels, their mission is to bring to fruition God's purposes and God's plans. So when it says that he became, he's references being made to Messiah's mission, and his mission was to give his life a ransom for many. So the writer is saying that when he became incarnate, he became superior in that he fulfilled a higher calling, and also he had received a higher calling to bring about the redemption of the world and accomplished that higher calling. And in addition, he became superior in that by virtue of his nature, he was superior, and in his incarnation, the joining of humanity, which is created a little lower than the angels, being united to the divine nature of Messiah, and thus becoming the God-man, was a manifestation of his superiority. So that's what the writer is speaking about. It's not that he was inferior and became superior, but he was superior by virtue of his divine nature from the beginning, and that superiority was enlarged, as it were, when it was joined to his humanity, and he became incarnate and became the God-man. And that superior nature of Messiah was even more enhanced by virtue of the superior mission. And because it was a superior mission, it was a superior accomplishment. So that's what the writer means to denote when he says he became. And this term superior, let me see. This word superior is a word that occurs 3 times. It's the word kraton, but and it can speak of being greater in status. It can refer to being better in value. And so both meanings are sort of included here. Greater in status as the God-man, greater in value as one who was of a superior nature from the very beginning. And so 13 times, and here are the references to it. Further, he says, so he became much superior as the name he has inherited. Of course, he's saying his name is superior. By name, he doesn't mean just the name Yeshua. He means the very character of Messiah with respect to the fullness of who he is. So when we speak about the name of God, the unique name, the sacred name of God, this is what he's making reference to, is that he's superior with respect to his nature in all of its respects. And so in Philippians chapter 2, where he says, at the name of Yeshua, every knee will bow and every tongue confess. Well, it means not just at the name Yeshua, but he means at the very, very person, at the very presence of Messiah, because of the fullness of his nature as God. Every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. So you have, for example, in the book of Revelation, I'm just turning to it, Revelation chapter 19, John writes, I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse whose rider is called Faithful and True. And with justice he judges and makes war. His eyes are like a blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns. He has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. So what he means is his name is a reflection of the fullness of God's character and revelation. The Word became flesh, and the revelation of the full nature of God embodied in his person is what is being referred to in by John here in the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 2, verse 17, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give him a white stone with a new name. By new name, it means we will be transformed in character, and thus we'll be given not only a new body, in which our mortal bodies will be given new bodies and put on immortality, or this corruptible will put on incorruption, but the very nature of our being will change, and we will have a new character. We will become permanentized in righteousness. We will no longer be in the presence of sin. As they say, in justification, when we were declared righteous and saved, We were saved from the penalty of sin. In sanctification, the process by which we're being conformed into the image of Messiah, we are being saved from the power of sin. And at our glorification, when our bodies are resurrected and we receive new bodies that are incorruptible and immortal, we will be saved from the very presence of sin. And thus our bodies will be made sinless. And it will be a new name, a new character, new nature to who we are. So he has a superior nature, superior name, because the name speaks of the totality of his character and the totality of his nature. So now in verse 5, which is where we're picking up, in verse 5 to verse 14, the writer now appeals to 7 passages from the Hebrew scriptures to support his argument that Messiah is superior. He made the statement. Now, can it be shown to be true? And so beginning at verse 5, he says, for to whom? Because he is superior. Why? Because to which of the angels did God ever say, verse 5, you are my son, today I have become your father? Or again, or in another place, I will be his father and he will be my son. So the first thing that he does is that he will quote from Psalm, what is he quoting from? Psalm 2. Is that not? Say, I can't read that. That's what it's killing me. Let me see if I can. Whoops. Whoa. Isn't that interesting? Psalm 2. Whoops. Psalm 2, verse 7. So let me just get it here. Psalm 2 is our first passage. Psalm 2, verse 7. So let's turn there. Keep your finger in Hebrews. Let's go back to Psalm 2. First 2 Psalms in the book of Psalms make up the introduction to the book of Psalms. We don't want to go through all of this, but all of the context of the book of Psalms. But the first 2 Psalms is the introduction to the book of Psalms. The last 5 Psalms, Psalm 45 through, Psalm 45 through 145 through 150 are, let me hold on here. Let me just do this so I can, this is so weird. But that's okay. Psalm 1 and 2 forms the introduction to the book of Psalms. Psalm 145 through 150 forms its conclusion. This book of Psalms divided into 5 books. The first book of Psalms is Psalm 1 to 41. All the Psalms, let's say Psalm 3 through 41 are all attributed to David. Psalm 1 and 2 are the only anonymous Psalms. They might very well have been written by David as well, but they are not stated as such. Psalm 1 and 2 basically are united. They're really one big psalm. Notice Psalm 1 verse 1, blessed is the man. And notice Psalm 2 verse 12, look how it ends. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. So you have this inclusio, this opening, closing phrase. Psalm 1 is really about Messiah. Blessed is the man. Well, the question we would ask is, who is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked perfectly? Who is the man who never stands in the way of sinners? Who is the man who never sits in the seat of mockers? Well, there's only one man who has never walked in the counsel of the wicked, never stood in the way of sinners, never sat in the seat of mockers, and that's the promised Messiah of Israel. Who is the one who always finds delight in the law of the Lord? It's only Messiah. He said, I came not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. He's the only one who found delight in the law always. He's the only one who always meditated on the law day and night. He's the only one who is like a tree planted by streams of water and yielding its fruit. He is the unique one. So Messiah is introduced to us with respect to his humanity in verse 1. As he comes into the world, he's a man blessed of God. He's the God-man, blessed of God because of his righteousness and his holiness and his faithfulness and his obedience. And he's one who is always producing fruit. And the Lord watched over him as he does over all who follow in the ways of God. But the focus is on Messiah, who is the man. Notice the definite article, not who are those who, but blessed is that man. And so it's a psalm about Messiah, although it's applicable to us as we are intended to live a righteous life by virtue of depending upon the Messiah, who alone lived a righteous life. And then in Psalm 2, we have the introduction of Messiah, who is reigning as king. So in Psalm 1, he's the God-man who comes into our world and as such lives a righteous, holy life, and thereby demonstrates he's Messiah. And Psalm 2 is at the end of his ministry, and at the time appointed by God, he will inherit the nations of the world. And that's what he says. Why do the nations conspire? Verse 2, the kings of the earth take their stand against the Lord and against his anointed one. Well, the word anointed one is Mashiach in verse 2. Who is this anointed one? Well, he's the man of Psalm 1, verse 1, who doesn't walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor in the way of sinners, nor with mockers. And but who are those who are? Well, they're the nations. And God and the Messiah will break their chains and throw off. They're saying, let us break his chains and throw off their fetters. Just make sure you're all muted because we're kind of hearing some ambient noises. I've tried to make sure all of you are, but I may have missed some of you coming in later. And thus in verse 4, the one enthroned in heaven laughs. So this is a psalm. Psalm 1 and 2 is about Messiah. And that stands to reason because as introductory psalms to the book of Psalms is about Messiah. Of course, it's also about us, but it's about us as we are to be relevant to Messiah. It's about Israel, but Israel who is to be responsive to the Messiah, who would save them from their sin and provide them with all the blessings God has. But Psalm 1 and 2 is specifically about him. So now in Psalm 2, this passage points to the Son as being an heir. And so the writer to the Hebrews said, to which of the angels did he say, you are my son, today I've become your father, I will be his father and he will be my son. Well, he's looking at Psalm 2, and we have the voice of God, verse 6, I have installed my king on Zion. And then we have the Messiah, verse 7, speaking, he, that is the Lord, said to me, that is Messiah, you are my son, today I have become your father. In our translation, you are my son, looking at right to the Hebrews, today I have become your father, or I have begotten you. This phrase begotten does not emphasize birth or origin. See, those that deny the deity of Messiah usually connect verse 4, so he became superior, with verse 5, I have become your father. But this word to become, again, here in the sense of being, some translations would say begotten, the word is it's gigeneka, because it's a verbal form, but again, it is from the word genao, as we saw before, to become or to beget or to bring about. But here the emphasis is not on his origin or his birth, but it's a legal term that stresses his right as the firstborn. In the Hebrew scriptures, we read of the right of primogeniture, which is the right of the firstborn. And the right of the firstborn was entitled to a double portion of all that the father possessed, and the rest of the sons would then divide up the rest of the inheritance. Well, here, the usage is that way, saying he's preeminent. He's the firstborn. And by firstborn, it doesn't mean God has many sons, but it means that he is the preeminent. He's the one who has preeminence, which is what the writer's trying to point out. He said in verse 4, he is by virtue of his nature superior to the angels. And now he's looking at Psalm 2. How do you demonstrate his superior nature? Well, Psalm 2 speaks about his uniqueness as being preeminent, or having primacy with respect to his nature in relation to the Father. So Messiah was always the eternal Son in his relationship to God the Father, but at a certain point, he's always the second person. You have to remember, we understand that the scriptures speak of God as triune, and so he, with respect to his persons, he exists eternally as Father, Son, Holy Spirit. There are three persons, and the Father, even though they are one God, they are three unique, distinct persons. The Father is not the Son is not the Father is not the Spirit, and the Spirit is not the Father. These names and titles are not just titles that the one God has at different times of his existence, but they are three unique persons. And the reality of this is seen in that, for example, at the immersion of Messiah, the Father speaks, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." The Spirit, independent of the Father, descends like a dove, or in appearance like a dove, to John. And Messiah, independent of the Spirit of God descending upon him, and the Father, who speaks of his delight in the Son, is being immersed. They're three distinct persons. This is why in the Great Commission, the end of Matthew 28, it says that we are to baptize disciples in the name, singular, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, not in the names, because we're not baptizing with respect to the names. We're baptizing with respect to the one unique God, who is Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So baptizing one or immersing one in the name of means to enable an identification with God himself. And who is God himself? Well, he is one God who exists as three persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So we baptize in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, because the three are one. Mystery, indeed. Complex, absolutely. We basically attempt to define and understand, and in doing so, we limit what is genuinely or fully being communicated with respect to the nature of God. So here we have this reference to God saying of Messiah, "I have installed my king," and the king whom he has installed is his Son, who has always had this eternal sonship relationship to the Father. But at a certain point, he was declared a son. He was proclaimed as the Son. And when was he so declared? Well, the psalm seems to imply or make reference to two moments. It simply says, "He said to me, you are my son. Today, this day, I have become your father. This day, I am declared as your father," or can equally be said, "I am declared as the Son." So when was he so declared? There are two possibilities to this. in the book of Acts, we find that this declaration was confirmed and made at the resurrection. That is to say, the resurrection was the declaration of the sonship of Messiah. What does that mean? It means that the resurrection was God's statement of approval that his death on the cross was in fulfillment of all he had intended for the purpose of providing salvation for Israel and for all peoples who would embrace what the Messiah has done for them personally, and one day nationally, when Israel as a nation repents of their rejection, notice not crucifixion, but rejection of Messiah, and receive him as a nation. And that's what Paul is referring to in 11:25 when he says, all Israel shall be saved. All Israel is talking to the nation. Every single individual among Israel will finally have a full nation, one nation. We never had that, never will, until the nation of Israel receives Messiah. And Paul tells us, 11:25 and 26, it will be when the deliverer comes from Zion and turns away all ungodliness from Jacob. So when Messiah returns, that fulfillment will occur. The this day may very well be a reference to when Israel as a nation turns their hearts to Messiah. And that's what Isaiah speaks of when he raises the question, I think it's in Isaiah chapter 66, can a nation be born again in a day? He's talking about the moment that Israel as a nation becomes saved, which will occur at the return of Messiah to establish his kingdom, when the Lord installs, as it says in verse 6 of Psalm 2, when he installs his king on Zion on his holy hill. And when he does that, the deliverer has now come from Zion, and he will, and enthroned on Zion, and he will turn away all ungodliness from Jacob, and the remnant of Israel that is existing at that time will become a saved nation. So at the resurrection, the declaration was made that his atoning sacrifice as Messiah was not only accomplished, but it was accepted by the Father. And in being accepted by the Father, it provided what theologians refer to as propitiation. Propitiation means to say that the wrath of God was satisfied in that Messiah endured the wrath of God. He endured the punishment for us, for our sin. What is the punishment that we are due? The punishment we are due because of our sin is the wrath of God. And so what did Messiah endure? He endured the wrath of God for our sin. And in enduring it, he satisfies the judgment that needed to be paid for our sin because of the justice of God. And so in satisfying God's wrath, he therefore can provide salvation and deliverance who place their trust in faith in Messiah and what he has done. The writer is saying the day when God declared that the sacrifice was accepted and Messiah was recognized for who he was at the resurrection. That's what the apostles say. And it will have its fullest manifestation at the return of Messiah, when the ramifications of the death of Messiah will result in the salvation of the nation of Israel. So long way around the barn there to make reference, but it's all important theological realities that the writer is making reference to in defense of his claim that Yeshua is superior in nature to the angels. And that superiority is seen in the declaration that the Father makes, that the Son, that the Messiah is his eternal Son. And that declaration was at the resurrection, with its ultimate fulfillment at the return of Messiah. And in that respect, he is therefore shown, that's one of his arguments, to show, the writer's arguments, to show that Yeshua is as mighty as the angels are, as significant as they are. And he's going to talk about some of their significance. Despite how significant and how wonderful and how great the angels in heaven are, they are nevertheless inferior to Messiah, and Messiah is infinitely superior to them. So by way of example, we can't go through all of this to the degree we might like, or certainly I would love to share with you, but for example, in Acts chapter 13, Paul is, chapter 13, Paul is in Galatia, and he says, we tell you, verse 32, the good news. It's the great news. What is this great news? Well, it is what God promised our fathers. Well, who are our fathers? Well, the Jewish people. That's what he's saying. And so what did he promise them? He promised that the promise he made, he has fulfilled for us. Their children. He's talking about Israel. And that the promise that he fulfilled by, he hasn't told us the promise yet. He's only telling us that God has been faithful and has fulfilled his promise that he's made to us. And he fulfilled the promise by raising up Yeshua. It's resurrection, as it is written in the second Psalm. Now we know what it is. You are my son. Today I have become your father. The fact that God raised him from the dead, never to decay, is further stated. So why is the resurrection so significant? It's significant because it's God's declaration of the superiority of Messiah. And that superiority is seen not just over the angels, that's the writer's point, but his superiority over everything is what Paul is making, is seen in that he has fulfilled the mission that the prophets spoke of, a mission that alone could bring about the salvation of the world. And that salvation of the world was initially promised to Israel. And that's why Paul will write Romans 1:16, the gospel is the power of God unto salvation, everyone who believes, to the Jew first. And this is what Paul is saying here as well. The promise was to us, the Jews. And the promise to the Jews makes the fulfillment of that promise preeminently relevant to the Jewish people. And because it's relevant to the Jewish people, in that God is fulfilling his promise to them, in that it is relevant to the Jewish people as a fulfilled promise to them, it can thereby become beneficial and relevant to the Gentiles. If it doesn't fulfill God's promises to Israel, it can't be of any benefit to the Gentiles. That's why one commentator has said Romans 1:16, in essence, is saying, and not just Romans 1:16, but now we could see Acts 13:33. In essence, what it's saying is, if Yeshua is not the Jewish Messiah, or we can even make it more specific, if Yeshua is not the Messiah promised to the Jews, then he cannot be the Messiah for the Gentiles. So that's the essence of what the writer's saying. I made reference to Romans 1:16, but if you turn, again, keeping our finger in Hebrews and Psalm 2, in Romans chapter 1, whereby Paul is going to lead into Romans 1:16, he says in verse 3 and 4, through him, that is through Yeshua, for his name's sake, we received grace and apostleship to call people from among all the Gentiles to the obedience that comes from faith. Why can he now be an apostle to the Gentiles? Because we received grace and apostleship, because the Jewish people have received the fulfillment of the promise. Now there can be a ministry that is to the Gentiles. So again, he's superior because of the nature of his ministry. Secondly, let me just see because I can't see it. He says, secondly, no angel, and this is still with Psalm 2:7, no angel is ever called a son of God. So in Psalm 2, he said, I will proclaim the decree, Messiah says of the Father. Verse 7, he said to me, you are my son. So no angel was ever called a son of God. Now, it is true, angels collectively were called sons of God. You see this in Genesis 6, where we read a very interesting passage, can't get into it, but the sons of God saw the daughters of men. In Job 1:6, we see the sons of God as a phrase for the angels, and Satan being among them when God says to Satan, have you seen my servant Job? Psalm 29, verse 1. And it is true that believers are called sons of God by virtue of their adoption. We're not sons of God like Yeshua is. Yeshua is the second person of the triunity, and therefore the Son of God, by meaning to say of the same nature and essence, but a distinct person that is the second person, the Son of God. But believers are not, we're not made equal with Messiah. We always will bow before him as the second person of the triunity. But we are called sons of God. That's certainly true. But that is not by virtue of our nature. That is by virtue of our adoption. And so we're brought into what is referred to as God's family. Israel is called sons of God, children of God. Remember, Pharaoh was told, let my people go. If you don't let them go to worship me in the wilderness, I will slay your son. Israel is my son. Let him go to worship me in the wilderness. I think that's in Exodus 3. This is the message Moses is to bring. And the reason why he kills, or the Lord kills the firstborn in Egypt, is because of the attempt by Pharaoh to kill the firstborn among Israel. And so you have God bringing about the same judgment on Egypt that was perpetrated against his people. And this is in accordance with his promise to Abraham. I'll bless them that bless thee, curse them that curse thee, in Genesis chapter 12. So angels collectively, never individually, but collectively referred to as sons of God. Believers are also referred to as sons of God. Yeshua is called the Son of God in various places, as you can see in these different passages. Interestingly enough, in the Luke and Mark account, when Yeshua is immersed, Messiah said, the Father says, "This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased." This phrase, well pleased, is really taken right out of Isaiah 42:1, where the Messiah, referred to as the servant of the Lord, is spoken of as one in whom the Lord found delight. So when in the New Testament we read of the Father saying, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased," that's a reference to Isaiah 42:1, where Isaiah says that the Messiah would be the servant of the Lord in whom the Father would find his delight. And then further, this day is that day of the resurrection and the reign of Messiah. Similarly, Psalm 110, which may very well be the most important psalm in the book of Psalms, it says, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. So he is this day, he is declared what he always has been. He has always been the second person of the triunity, and he has always been a priest forever. And that declaration of his uniqueness, which uniqueness makes him superior to the angels, was pronounced upon him. The second passage is taken from 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 14. The parallel passage is in First Chronicles. And in this passage, he says, let me find it, where he says, "Ask of me, I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. You will rule them with an iron scepter. You will dash them to pieces like pottery. This is um, these are references to the psalm, but then the focus is on, especially with respect to the inheriting of the nations and the possession of the earth, ruling with a scepter, is focused now on God's promise to David that he would always have a son to sit on the throne of David. So this is like part of the Davidic Covenant in 2 Samuel. And the key promise in this covenant is that the God-man descendant of David is destined to rule over a saved and restored Israel from Jerusalem. He'll reign from Jerusalem and from the throne, from the throne of David. He has to be seen as the God-man because number one, he said he's making this declaration at the resurrection. So the resurrection, the declaration is, and ask of me and I will make the nations your inheritance. In order to inherit the nations, has to be a man. But in order to inherit the ends of the earth as his possession, he would need to be God. So the key promise, and this is what David is told, that he would always have a son to sit on the throne. And these two passages, 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles, are very interesting because they're somewhat distinct. So let's take a look at that, try to move this along. But in 2 Samuel chapter 7, we're looking at like verse 14. He says, I will be, so let's go back here. Verse 11, the Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. So notice this threefold promise that's about to unfold. He would establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your father, I will raise up your offspring. Notice your offspring, a descendant of his, to succeed you. Notice this one will come from your own body. Whoops, I don't know what happened here. Let me close this. He says that will come from your own body. So two things. Number one, he would establish his house, which is another way of saying a dynasty. Secondly, it would be established through a descendant who would come from his own body, and it would be a human being from his own body. And then in verse 13, verse 12, and he says, and I will establish his kingdom. So you've got this sense of the house, the kingdom, and he is the one who will build a house for my name. Again, notice that for God is speaking through the prophet, and I will establish his throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. And when he does wrong, I will punish him with the rod of men. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul. Notice the end, verse 16, your house, your kingdom will endure forever, and your throne will be established forever. So now those three key phrases are really critical to take hold of. House, kingdom, throne. Now, why? Because if we turn to Luke, chapter 1, I think it's chapter 1, maybe. Let me just get to it. In Luke chapter 1, when we read of the angel Gabriel coming to Mary, I'm looking at verse 26 of Luke chapter 1. In the 6th month, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth. Verse 28, the angel went to her and said, greetings, you are highly favored. It's another way of saying greatly blessed. Verse 29, Mary was greatly troubled at the word and this greeting. Why am I highly blessed? Why is the Lord with me? Why am I getting an angelic message telling me this, and an angel telling me this? Verse 30, the angel said to her, don't be afraid. You have found favor with God. You will be with child, give birth to a son, and you will name him Yeshua. He will be great. He will be called the Son of the Most High. So he's going to be the God-man. The Lord God will give him, notice, throne of his father David. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever. His kingdom will never end. See the three same categories. So what we have is the Davidic Covenant, the promise of God to David for a descendant to sit on the throne forever, is reiterated to Yeshua by the angel Gabriel in his message to Mary. So what the angel is telling him is this one will be the fulfillment. Let me just mention again, make sure you're muted because there's some ambient noise and I don't want to get off the sharing screen and mute you all. So just take a look and make sure that you're muted. So what you have here is the angel Gabriel is proclaiming to Mary that the child she is to give birth to is the one who will fulfill the promise to David. So with that in mind, our finger still in Hebrews and now in 2 Samuel, turn also to 1 Chronicles. Keep your finger in 2 Samuel, look at 1 Chronicles. 1 Chronicles, we have a restatement of Nathan's promise, God's promise through Nathan to David. And so if you look at verse 11 of 1 Chronicles chapter 17, he says, when your days are over, you go to be with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, one of your own sons. Now, notice that distinction. You may not catch it right away, but if you go back to 2 Samuel chapter 7, he said, he didn't say it that way. He said, when your days are over and you rest from your fathers, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, who will come from your own body. But in 1 Chronicles, he doesn't say that. He doesn't say from your own body. He says, when your days are over, you go to your father, I will raise up your offspring, a descendant, to succeed you, one of your own sons. So one is from his body, one is a later descendant. Notice also, he says, I will establish his kingdom. He says in verse 12, he is the one who will build a house for me, and I will establish his throne forever. I will be his father, he will be my son. I will never take my love away from him as I took it away from your predecessor, Saul. But that's not what he said in 2 Samuel. If you look at 2 Samuel, he said, look at verse 14, I will be his father, he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him. Notice we don't have any statement of any expected wrongdoing for which he would receive punishment in the First Chronicles passage. So in the First Chronicles passage, he's a descendant of David, not from his own body, as 2 Samuel said. And in the Chronicles passage, he is never spoken of as doing wrong so as to necessitate punishment, as it is stated in the 2 Samuel passage. And lastly, if you look at First Chronicles chapter 17, look at verse 14. He says, I will set him over my house and my kingdom forever. His throne will be established forever. I will set him over my house and my kingdom. But if you look at the 2 Samuel passage, he says, your house and your kingdom. So while in both passages, a son of David is referred to, in both passages, a different son is alluded to. In 2 Samuel, the son is Solomon. He's the son that will come from David's own body, his son Solomon. He's the son who will be disciplined for disobedience, Solomon. And he's the son who will establish David's kingdom by building David's temple. But in the First Chronicles passage, it's not about Solomon. It's about the Messiah. He's the one who will be a later descendant of David, not from his immediate body. And he is the one, the Messiah is the one who will not need to be forewarned of disobedience, because he will never disobey the Father, for he perfectly obeys the law. He came to fulfill it. And in the First Chronicles passage, he establishes the kingdom of God, the Messianic kingdom, whereas Solomon would further establish and stabilize David's kingdom the Davidic kingdom. So there are two different entities. The writer, back to the Hebrews passage, Hebrews chapter 1, the writer is alluding to these two passages to show the superiority of Messiah, because the Messiah will be the ultimate fulfillment of the Davidic promise to rule over a saved and restored Israel. And he will rule from Jerusalem and from the throne of David. And as such, he is superior to the angels. Now, Isaiah 9:6, Jeremiah, we don't have time to look at those messianic prophecies, but they speak of the divine human nature of Messiah, him being the God-man. The third passage he makes reference to is a combination of Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 43 and Psalm 97 verse 7. The writer says, well, in verse 8, your throne, O God, will last forever, and the righteousness will be the scepter of your kingdom. He says, you have loved righteousness, hated wickedness, therefore God, oh, that's Psalm 45. Verse 6. And again, when God brings the firstborn into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him. Now, this passage, Deuteronomy 32, verse 43, is a quote right out of and all of these are quotes out of the Septuagint. That's what LXX means. And these passages call all angels to worship him. Now, at Messiah's second coming, all angels will worship him as he is enthroned as the God-man, fulfilling all of his accomplishments. And this is what the book of Revelation demonstrates, that at Messiah's second coming, all the angels bow before him and worship him. Now, he is spoken of as the firstborn, we saw already, which is a messianic title. And it's used in these passages to speak of Messiah. And then further, he says, in speaking of the angels, he says, verse 7, he makes his angels, my translation, winds, his servants, flames of fire. He's quoting from Psalm 104, verse 4. By the way, the quotations, the 7 passages that he makes reference to, 5 of them are from the Psalms, 1 is from Deuteronomy, and 1 is from Samuel. That is to say, he's quoting from the law, the prophets, and that in the case of Samuel, the former prophets, the early prophets, and the writings. Now, why is that important? It's important because in rabbinic thought, when one is making an argument, a theological point, and wants to defend his argument, certain portions of scripture were seen as more important than others. And therefore, if an argument can be supported with more important passages, then your argument is stronger. It's not enough to say, well, the Bible says this. It's important to note where the Bible says something. So, for example, if there was an argument, a difference of a theological point of view, and I could demonstrate my point of view by quoting from, say, Isaiah, and you could demonstrate your point of view by quoting from Deuteronomy or from the book of Numbers, well, your defense for your argument would be seen as stronger because you're quoting from the law, the first 5 books of Moses, whereas I'm quoting from an important prophet, no doubt, but nevertheless from the prophets. Now, so if you want to strengthen your argument, you want to support your argument with the most important passages from the most important sections of the scripture. And the most important section of scripture is the Mosaic Law, the first 5 books. The second most important section of scripture are the prophets. Now, the Jewish people divided the prophets into the former and latter prophets. The latter prophets are what Christians oftentimes refer to as the major and minor prophets. books like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Zephaniah, Obadiah. They'd be the latter prophets. Your former prophets are writings of an earlier time and are generally referred to by Christians as the historical books. They're all prophetic in that they are divinely revealed, but the former prophets are books like Joshua, Judges, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings. So in this instance, and then you got the writings, and of course the writings are your poetry, your Psalms, Proverbs, etc. So what the writer is doing here is he's strengthening his argument to demonstrate that Yeshua is superior, for he's the Messiah, and the Messiah is superior in every respect to the very great creations of God, known as angels. He's quoting from the law, Deuteronomy, the prophets, and the writings. And so he's kind of giving us a smorgasbord of biblical passages, all of which are building upon each other to strengthen his argument. So now he quotes again from the Psalms, Psalm 104, verse 4, in which the writer speaks of the angels are servants. And so therefore they have sort of a temporal ministry in contrast to Messiah, who's, as the writer's pointing out, whose ministry is of an eternal nature. Your throne, he makes his angels winds, his servants flames of fire. He means to speak of the manner in which angels fulfill their ministry. They are servants of God to bring about God's purposes and plans. They do this in moving in and out of God's sphere, God's creation. Whereas in the case of Messiah, his ministry is of an eternal nature and of an eternal character. The Greek word in the Septuagint, as well as here, translated servant, is not the typical word. It is not the word doulos, which means a slave. The word that is used here is the word like tower, lay toward goose. Really difficult to pronounce. Lay tower gas, which is a word for servant, but it has the notion of one who is devoted, religious devotion. In other words, they're servants in that they serve Messiah in worship and in adoration. It's almost as if he's thinking about, we don't know for sure, but he's thinking of those angels, for example, that surround the throne and say, holy, holy, holy. They are serving God, but they're serving God in a liturgical capacity. They're worshiping, they're demonstrating a religious devotion to Messiah in their servanthood. So it doesn't just mean in this passage, in this phrase, that they do God's bidding, but rather they bow before God, bow before Messiah in worship and adoration, which is what the angels were bidded to do in verse 6. Let all the angels, in essence, you could say, let all the angels come and worship him. And therefore, he says, they are his servants. And as servants, they are serving him by coming and worshiping him out of religious devotion. And his angels in their worship, it seems to me that he's thinking of the seraphim that have the 6 wings that are surrounding the throne. And with their wings, they move about. And as Ezekiel points out, when they move their wings, there's a sound that is created, and a wind that is generated, and they are seraphim. The word seraph means fire, so they are like fiery angelic beings who, as they circle the throne and worship, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. The whole earth is full of his glory. See, they are serving him in religious adoration. And as they serve, they are flaming before him, and they are moving their wings in movement around him. And that's what the writer is referring to. When further, he then quotes from Psalm in verse 8, Psalm 45, verse 6 and 7, which says, your throne, O God, will last forever and ever, and righteousness will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness, hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions. So two things are emphasized: the deity of the Son, because he's called God. In Psalm 45, verse 7 and 8, he says, the Lord is speaking, the psalmist is speaking. Maybe we should turn to it. And he's saying, your throne, O God, will last forever. Verse 9, you have loved righteousness. He says, therefore, God, your God. So who is the God of God? Who is God's God? Well, he's speaking of Messiah. And Messiah is God, and his God is God. He's a member of the triunity. And so, in terms of his unique persons, God has a God: Father, Son, Holy Spirit. It's odd to say that, and I'm cautiously saying it, but the psalmist is saying, God, your God. And so, Messiah is God, and he has authority in the Messianic age, because he said, righteousness will be the scepter of your kingdom. And he has an eternal throne, because he says, your throne, O God, speaking to Messiah, will last forever. When he says your throne, O God, it's the second person, because in verse 9, he says, therefore, God, that's who he's addressing, your God. And in his incarnation, he was obedient to the Father. And in that sense, the Father is his God. And he says on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Who is Yeshua's God? Yeshua's God is the Father. So Psalm 45 is the Messiah. The psalmist is speaking to Messiah, saying, your throne, O God, meaning Messiah, is forever. He has an eternal throne. And the only one who can have an eternal throne is an eternal one. And the only one who's eternal is God. And in this case, Messiah, who he's focusing attention on, is God. And he has an eternal throne. Therefore, he has eternality. And because he has eternality, only God has eternality. That's why he is the first and the last. That's why he's the beginning and the end. And that's why he has no beginning and no end, because he's both beginning and end at the same time. And being beginning and end means you are always. And therefore, he is divine. And as such, he is superior to the angels. And he is anointed with the Spirit of God by anointing you with the oil of joy. So what was Messiah anointed with? Well, that's what the baptism is about. Messiah is anointed, and he's anointed as Israel's savior, as Israel's king. And when he is immersed, he is also at that point anointed, which is what the descent of the Holy Spirit is. It's the anointing by God the Father of the Son, and he's anointed with the Holy Spirit. And that anointing is what separates him as the unique king of Israel. And so there are, there are five, okay, so let's see, I can't see it. So there are five specific ramifications of this section that we just looked at. Number one, the Father addresses the Son as God. Your throne, O God. If the psalm is an expression of the Father or the psalmist. Secondly, the Son is destined to have an eternal throne. Thirdly, his reign will be righteous, and righteousness will be the scepter of your kingdom. No king in Israel has ever reigned righteously, at least not perfectly righteous. Even David was an adulterer and a murderer. Fourthly, the reason why his reign will be righteous is because he loves righteousness. Verse 9, you have loved righteousness. And so he embraces righteousness, came not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. He embraces righteousness. Be ye holy because I, the Lord, am holy. And that's exactly what Messiah was. And consequently, the Messiah will be anointed, exalted above all. So 5 ramifications of that passage. And then he then quotes from, what is that, Psalm 102, verses 25 and 27. And here he says, in the beginning, O Lord, you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They will wear out like a garment. Yeshua is superior in his basic existence. In the beginning, O Lord. He's right from the very beginning. And that's what John 1:1 says. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. This is what Messiah said. Before Abraham was, he doesn't say I was, but he says I am. He's making a claim to being deity, and he's making a claim to eternal existence. And that he laid the foundation of the earth and the heavens, which are the work of his hands. To speak of the heavens and the earth is to speak of the universe. He just doesn't mean this planet and the heavens above it. No, he means all that exists. He is sovereign. He is the creator of the universe. And he is sovereign over the changes in the universe. They will perish, but you remain. They will wear out like a garment. You will roll them up like a robe, he says. Like a garment, they will be changed. So the Son is sovereign over the changes in the universe. There will be changes. So when people say there's climate change, well, that's because this is what God has ordained. And this is what God has brought about. Now, these things come about in accordance with God's will. I'm not saying that we ought not to be. I'm not suggesting that we should be abusive of God's creation. Far from it. I'm just simply saying that everything is under the control of God's sovereignty. And the changes that take place in the universe, it will roll up. One day it will come to an end. And there will be a new heavens and a new earth. Whatever process God will use to bring that about, he will bring it about, and he'll be sovereign with respect to it. And then a new heavens and new earth will come about. And so he says, the Son is the unchangeable Lord in the midst of a changing universe. He's sovereign over the changes, but he remains the same. But you remain the same, and your years will never end. The Son is eternal. He'll never have an ending. He never has a beginning. You and I are, maybe it's better to say you and I are everlasting. We have a beginning, and once we have a beginning, we have no end. We'll live forever. Question is where? Will we live forever in God's presence, or will we live forever alienated from him in judgment? So we're everlasting in the sense that we have a beginning with no end. But God is eternal in that he has no beginning, no end. And therefore, he says, but your years will never end. And that's because his years never had a beginning. Now, with respect to his incarnation, he had a beginning. He was born somewhere between 6 and 4 BC in a particular place, Jerusalem. And that's why Micah 5, Jerusalem, in Bethlehem. And that's why Micah 5:2 is such a powerful passage, because he says the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, but his goings forth are from eternity, from of old, from ad olam, from unto everlasting. So there's a sense in which, with regard to his incarnation, there was a point at which he became a man, and he was born, and he was conceived, and he did die on the cross. But there's also a relevance to him in which there is no beginning and there is no end. And that's what makes him unique and makes him superior to the angels and really superior to all. And lastly, while he is eternal, the universe will someday be discarded like a piece of cloth. And so, 7th passage he mentions is perhaps the most important passage in the book of Psalms. Unfortunately, we can't really go into that psalm in greater detail at this point. We'll look at it again because he'll make reference to it another time later in the book of Hebrews. But here he makes the point as he brings the passage, this chapter to a close. To which of the angels did God ever say, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet? And so he says, Messiah's enthronement in glory is at the right hand of the Father. To which of the angels did he ever say, sit at my right hand? To sit at his right hand necessitates being equal to him. To sit at his right hand means you can sit next to God and in all of his glory. And it's a place of honor and a place of perfection, which Messiah was in his life. And so Messiah's enthronement in glory is at the right hand of the Father, and his being seated shows that his work is complete. He's sitting at the right hand. The angels stand as ministering spirits, but Messiah sits at the right hand of God. Now he can get up if he desires, such as at the moment of Stephen was being stoned, he stood up. He said, I see the Messiah of Israel standing at the right hand of the Father. He's standing up to greet Stephen. He's getting ready to act in his behalf. But here he's seated because when he finished his redemptive work, which is where he started. Remember when he first started? He said, you are my son. Today I became your father. That's where he started. What was that day? It was the day of his resurrection, which resulted from his death. And his resurrection is brought to a completion by virtue of his ascension to the right hand of the Father, which is what he concludes with here in verse 13. It's like an inclusio. You've got the resurrection, and then he sort of digresses to speak about various other elements that demonstrate the superiority of Messiah, and concludes back to the resurrection and beyond to the ascension to the right hand of the Father. So verse 14, so are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? When he says to serve, again, he'll use this unique word of religious devotion. So in verse 14, while the Son is seated, angels are still busy. Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? While the Son is seated, angels are still busy. They're still doing their work as ministering spirits. Their work doesn't end. And so they're at least not until the assignment is, not until God's purposes and plans come to an end, and then a new purpose will occur for which the angels will be engaged. So believers, he says, have guardian angels. Are not angels ministering spirits sent to serve those? So it's limited who will inherit salvation. According to Matthew 18, verse 10, it would appear that these angels, as Messiah tells us not to offend these little ones because they're angels or observing. And so it begins at infancy, Matthew 18:10. Let me turn there just so that we've got it right. Matthew 18, verse 10. He says, see that you do not look down on one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. So it begins in infancy, and it continues throughout their lives. Psalm 91, verse 11, that angels are operating to protect us. Some angels, one day when we meet them, they're going to or when our life comes to an end for some of us, they'll probably look at us and say, phew, I'm glad that assignment is over. You were a tough one, man. Or something like, imagine an angel saying that to me. Certainly, if we came to faith later in life, and maybe say, wow, man, I thought I was going to lose that one, but finally they turned. Those of us that came a little earlier, they'd say, hey, that was easy peasy. That was an easy one. They've been walking with the Lord since they don't even know when it began, because it began so early in their lives. But in any case, it continues throughout our lives, and the angels observe what we say, according Ecclesiastes, and they observe our suffering, according to 1 Corinthians 4:9. So if you are suffering, know that you never, never, never suffer alone. 1 Corinthians chapter 4. I mean, those around you may not be sensitive, but 1 Corinthians 4, verse 9. Already you have all you want. Already you've become rich, you've become kings, and that without us. How I wish that you really had become kings so that we might be kings with you. For it seems to me that God has put us apostles on display at the end of the procession, like men condemned to die in the arena. We have been made a spectacle to the whole universe, to angels as well as men. They observe our sufferings. They observe the sufferings of the apostles. They are being escorted, as it were, to the arena to die at the hand of the lions. They're suffering, and they've been made a spectacle to the ends of the earth, including angels. Angels observe, implement signs of authority on women's heads. Heads covering says that women should have their heads covered because of the angels. We can talk about what that means another time, but nevertheless, they are observing. And angels escort the souls of believers to heaven. So they are ministering spirits sent to serve those who are elected by God, chosen by God. That's to be saved. That ought not to make us proud, but it ought to make us grateful, make us thankful. Sometimes my students have had a difficult time accepting this reality. Say, hey, it's not fair. How come so-and-so is it? Well, first of all, we don't know who's chosen, who isn't. But second of all, it's not meant to be thought of as to those out there. It's meant to be thought of by you and me. And I liken it to when I was a little kid, and we'd have pickup games of baseball or basketball or whatever, football. When you were the first one chosen, man, you were like, wow, they must think I'm pretty good, And if at the end of the choosing cycle, you don't get chosen, you got to sit on the sideline and watch, was it's a pretty bad thing. And the writers are telling us God's chosen us. We're on his team. And when it came to picking, he said, hey, I'm picking this one. How does that fare with our freedom of will and choice? I don't know. But the question is not either or, it's a both end. And here are not all angels ministering spirits to serve those who will inherit salvation. If you know the Lord, there's going to be an angel to give thanks to for their role in God's plan. Just like I just had spent some time with Arnold Fruchtenbaum. I thanked him for the investment he put into my own life as he helped me to learn God's word. Yeah, God taught me ultimately, but he taught me through a person. He taught me through Arnold as one of the persons. And it's a good thing to say, hey, thank you for what you've helped me to learn. Because I may not have learned that without you, but it's not a question of whether I would or wouldn't. What I've come to learn, you've been a part of, helping me to do. And one day we're going to see the angels that watched over us. We're going to say, hey, thank you for being faithful and being there when we needed you. And they'll say, just give thanks to God. And you say, yeah, we give thanks to God. But I'm grateful that he utilized you in this process. Sort of like Elisha's servant. Elisha says, God opened his eyes. He sees all these angels. I can imagine later he said, thank you guys for being here. Thank you, God, for sending them. So the writer is saying that Messiah is superior, and therefore, with the onslaught that is around us and the attacks that we're about to endure, let's show that Messiah is superior in our own lives by obeying him and fleeing. When Jerusalem is surrounded by armies, flee in the mountains. Don't re-identify yourself with the Jewish leadership that has rejected Messiah and stay here and think that you're going to make it through. No, judgment has been set. Physical death will be the result if you identify yourself with the nation as a whole that's rejected me. Separate yourself and you will live. And you ought to separate yourself and obey Messiah because he's superior to the angels. Okay, I'm going to stop the sharing. Let me include the stop